Welcome to the UCCS Undergraduate Research Showcase. We do this every term, and we're always excited for this event. It's the culmination of a lot of hard work. I know, to the students, I can say some of this work might have been among the most challenging in your academic careers, but it's really important to have a feel for what it takes to produce good evidence for making good decisions, because good decisions are sort of the basis of success, not only in policy, but in life. So I hope that the experience was worthwhile. And to our internship hosts, thank you so much for supporting our students. Experiential learning couldn't happen without experience, and you're the ones who provide it. So we're really grateful to everyone who's here, to the students for all their work, for the internship hosts for all their hosting, and let's begin.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Kravitz. And so again, thank you for everyone who is able to join us today. And so in terms of the format for today's undergraduate showcase presentation is that I'll call on each student. I'll say their name as well as where they interned at this term. The student will do their presentation, and then we will take one question from their internship host site. If the internship host site does not have a question, then that question goes over to the academic team. And then for the academic team, if you could raise your hand, and I'll go ahead and call on you. And right now what we're doing is just, student presentation, one question, but at the end, time permitting, then it'll basically be an open Q&A session where we'll go ahead and open the floor up to any questions from any of our internship host sites, basically towards any of our students, and basically any questions from our academic team as well. So, all right, and with that, let's go ahead and get started. So our first student that will be presenting today is Jared Brazda, who interned with the California Department of Public Health.
Hello. Everyone can see it?
It is still saying screen sharing. I'm sure it'll come up in just a second here. There we go. We can see it now.
Okay. For slow internet, I blame my city. Okay. Greetings, I am Jared Brazda. Last year, there were over 400,000 visits to California's Children's Hospital emergency rooms. 2018's Proposition 4 sought to give a $1.5 billion bond for improving children's hospitals, which leads to the question, what factors influence support for Prop 4, and to what degree? The literature sees partisanship as most important, and the California Democrats supported the proposition while the Republicans opposed it. At a county, however, voters, we know, can and do vote in their own interest. At a county level, I hypothesize that increases in Democratic partisanship and the percentage of children of a county's population will increase Prop 4 yes share, and having or bordering a children's hospital will increase share as well. To find the influence of each factor, I used 4 regression models. Figure 1 shows a clear geographic pattern in terms of access to children's hospitals. Figure 2 shows that partisanship and yes share are highly but imperfectly correlated. And figure 3 shows the results of the 4 regression models. Democratic partisanship and percent children significantly and consistently increased Prop 4 support. Had a larger coefficient than partisanship. Having a children's hospital was inconclusive, but bordering one provided a consistent increase in Prop 4 support. Population, median income, and children's were relatively unimportant. This leads us to conclude that the mechanism behind factor influence is perhaps some sort of combination of visibility and importance. Party is important, while the amount of children in a county is both personally and communally important and visible. Proposition stakeholders must consider factors other than party.
Great, thank you so much, Jared, for a great presentation today. And so if there is a question from the internship host site, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, I can go ahead and unmute you. All right, and then if not, a question from the academic team.
Hey, Jared, I have a question. That was just great. So one sort of nitty-gritty question, and one more implications question. So nitty-gritty, these are very interesting regression models. Can you interpret any of the coefficients for us, like in terms of how much change in one thing results in how much increase in voting for Prop 4? And then the other thing is just if you were, let's say you're an advocate for children's hospitals in general, what would you think about in terms of, based on the implications of your study, in terms of building support for these kind of public investments in the future?
Thank you. Two complex questions. One, so I just did 0 to 100. That's support. That's what it's measuring. In terms of specifically governor vote share and percent children, the coefficients, I think there's a difference in the coefficient. The range is smaller for percent children. California counties range from having 15% of the population be children to 30%. And while Democratic vote share range from 20 to 90, obviously more polarized. And in terms of what children's hospitals should do using this information, well, we've seen quite a few propositions relating to giving money to children, and they've passed. They've all had success. But if they want to increase their success, especially in counties that are less democratic, like for instance, Madera, I think pointing out that they have a children's hospital or that one is near is going to help their support, as well as keeping in mind and reminding voters of the amount of children in their community and how they will benefit from that.
Great. Thank you so much, Jared. And thank you, Dr. Kravitz, for the question. And so our next student today is Annelise Kalmanov, who also interned with the California Department of Public Health.
Does that work? Oh, I have to.
Yeah, you just have to do the present. Yep, perfect. That looks great. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm Annelise, and I will be presenting on interventions to increase cervical cancer screening in Asian American women. Okay, so Asian American women experience health disparities in cervical cancer, specifically in screening rates, as shown in Figure 1. This disparity can be attributed to things like socioeconomic factors, cultural barriers, and misinformation. Cervical cancer is a manifestation of the STI HPV and can be successfully treated if caught early enough. It can be tested for using a Pap test, otherwise known as a Pap smear. I conducted a systematic literature review of interventions to increase cervical cancer screening in Asian American women. I hypothesized that in-home visits from lay health workers, a non-professional community member, would increase cervical cancer screening the most, as participants would be more open to learn and ask questions in a smaller, more personal context. This review used the search engine PubMed, and I aimed to find studies that presented an intervention and measured like before and after screening rates. I used the mesh terms Asian American, uterine cervical cancer, and Papa Nicolau test, also a variety of synonyms for each. I applied some of PubMed's built-in filters and used the screening tool Covidence to sort out the rest of the studies according to Figure 2. After initial review, I found that around half of the studies focused on Vietnamese women, while the rest focused on Cambodian women, Korean women, and Chinese women. All interventions were community-centered, culturally attuned, and education-based. So overall, I found that all of the interventions presented significant increases in screening, furthering general support for this type of community education-based approach. All of the interventions were unique, but they could be sorted into 3 general categories. The first being education groups, the second being education groups involving lay health workers, and the third being in-home visits by lay health workers. I found that education groups on their own showed the biggest increases in screening rates. This can be seen in Figure 3, where the education groups on their own, the first 3 pairs of bars, show the biggest differences between the intervention and the control. So to conclude, policy efforts to decrease cervical cancer disparities amongst Asian Americans should include community-based approaches, specifically these educational groups. It's important to consider that none of the interventions reached target screening rates. So future initiatives should work in collaboration with other efforts. They're not really sufficient on their own. Further research might expand to databases other than PubMed and could examine specifically Asian subgroups that suffer the most from screening disparities, because the screening disparities vary a lot within the Asian American population. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Annelise, for a great presentation today. And if there's a question from her internship website, you can go ahead and raise your hand. I can go ahead and unmute you. All right. And then if not, over to the academic team. All right, Professor Quila.
Hi, Annelise. Thank you for your presentation today. I was wondering if in the future you were to conduct a study kind of similar to these ones, or on this type of topic, right? How would yours differ? What would you do differently than what we've seen in previous studies?
I would, I think I mentioned this briefly at the end, but I would definitely look at subgroups that have the most screening disparities. I think that if you look at figure 1, there is, like, for Asian Americans, there is less screening, but if you look at like very specific subgroups within the Asian American population, specifically like ones of lower socioeconomic status, the screening rates are much, much lower. So I think that grouping them all together makes it seem like there isn't as much of an issue. So I would try to target specific subgroups rather than looking at Asian Americans as a whole.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Annelise, for again a great presentation. And
Cindy, I just want to make a quick comment. Annelise, I think this was a home run in terms of how systematic reviews should be done in this class format. So congratulations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kravitz.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, so our next student today is Umesh Nadasan, who also interned with the California Department of Public Health.
Are you guys able to see it or?
Yep, looks great. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, hi, I'm Umesh. I'm a political science public service student at UC Davis, and my presentation is about level of insurance, are you really insured, and more specifically, access to care. So nearly 1 in every 4 Americans was reported to be underinsured, which really begs the question how access to care influences not only Americans as a whole, but more specifically low-income Californians. My research aims to address the question, how does income level affect an individual's odds of having access to a usual source of care across different types of insurance? In California, controlling for urbanicity, because if you live in an urban versus rural area, you may have differences in like hospitals you have access to, etc. So I hypothesized that as income level rises, the odds of having access to a usual source of care across all forms of insurance will remain relatively unchanged, or there'll be no significant correlation. I created 2 regressions using California Health Interview Survey data from 2021. So I took into account income, type of insurance, and urbanicity. So in the first model, I only focused on urbanicity and type of insurance, and you can see the odds of having a usual source of care are 4.1 to 1 for Medi-Cal versus no insurance. And then we can see that it's 10.49 to 1 for all other types of insurance versus no insurance. Once we compute income level into the model, we see that Medi-Cal actually increases to 4.39 to 1 odds, while all other types of insurance actually seems to decrease to 9.65 to 1% odds. And we can see as we increase in thirds of the income distribution, so 33% to 33%, the next 33%, we can see that you have a general increase in odds of having an access to a usual source of care. In figure 3, we can see the odds ratios of each individual income bracket in terms of increments of 10K. And as you can tell, towards the end, you have a higher general odds ratio of having access to a usual source of care versus at the early stages at like the 10 to 20K income bracket. So this kind of has some implications. Medi-Cal seems to have like a slight increase, while all other types of insurance seem to have a slight decrease. It's unsure as to how specifically income affects them, but we can say that as you increase in income, you have generally a higher odds of having a usual source of care. And there's this brings to light some potential policy solutions, namely income-based subsidies to help address the divide that comes from having a higher income that gives you a higher chance of having the usual source of care. Thank you.
Thank you, Umesh, for a great presentation today. And so if there is a question from the internship host line. All right, and if not, over to our academic team. All right, Ginger Alonso.
Hi, Umesh. This is really just a thoughtful and really unique approach. And I think I appreciate the way that you're looking at this problem and trying to get at this issue of underinsurance. And what I'm curious about is, do you take the need for care into account in this access measure? So when you have an access measure and you're trying to measure access to care, are you at all considering whether or not someone needs care, whether or not someone's actually healthy and doesn't even need to see a doctor at that point in time, aside from maybe the occasional preventative visit?
No, yeah. So the specific dependent variable that I was measuring was, it was access to a usual source of care, but it was more specifically access to a usual source of care when you need like medical advice or you're sick, or there was a couple different things. It was like a survey question. So it was asking people specifically, when you need a medical opinion or when you are sick, do you have a usual source of care? So that's kind of how I implemented that into the model. But you're definitely right that if I were to, try and do this project again more thoroughly, I would try to make sure that I could take into account actual need for care by maybe including age or something else that would be a potential factor in people who need care versus, just in general, or do they have access?
Great. Thank you so much, Umesh, for a great presentation. Thank you so much for your question, Ginger. And so our next student that will be presenting is Brianna Harris, who interned with Health Access.
Okay, can you see it?
Yes, looks great. Thank you.
Okay, cool. With the overturning of Roe v. Wade preventing abortions from being federally constitutional, women's access to reproductive health resources are under scrutiny. At least 66 clinics have halted services or closed nationwide, and many more may close in the future. Along with abortions, these clinics provide essential services such as cancer and STD screenings. Through my research, I'm investigating if there's a relationship between California's contribution to reproductive health resources and the overall health of the state's female population. I hypothesize that as the state invests more in reproductive health care, there is a decrease in diseases that deteriorate the health of the female population. For my methodology, I use a cross-sectional study to compare California to Texas and Florida. My independent variable was reproductive health resources, which was operationalized as each state's funding allocated towards center maintenance, research, and education. I researched the allocation amounts per state, then calculated per capita values in terms of female of reproductive age for unit rate amounts. Then I compared each state's reproductive health by observing 2019 new case and death rates for breast cancer and cervical cancer, since those are common diseases that are screened for in publicly funded facilities. From my findings, California's government contributed the most towards family planning with $67 million from the state blueprint on top of the Title 10 federal program grants, with other states relying solely on Title 10 funding. Per capita funding was 326% higher per capita than Texas and 269% higher than Florida. Other than the new breast cancer cases, there was some evidence that there's a relationship between California's more extensive funding and lower cancer incidence when compared to Texas and Florida's minimal Title 10 funding. There's a lack of statistical significance still, meaning that there is not great enough difference in the rates between states. So I suggest that California and other states continue to apply for these Title 10 grants to secure research opportunities to investigate more.
Great, fantastic, Brianna, what a great presentation. And so if there is a question from the internship host site, if you want to raise your hand, I can go ahead and unmute you. All right, and then if not, over to our academic team.
Okay, Brianna, this was really excellent. Can you tell us a little bit more about what went into these per capita funding calculations? Like what was the money? I missed what the money's actually getting spent on. And then from there, can you sort of speculate on the mechanism? You know, how does spending more money result in these small, statistically non-significant, but observable differences between the states?
Okay, so for the per capita funding, I first looked into if each state was devoting any money towards like reproductive health, but most of them use Title 10 funding, which is like federally funded. So organizations have to apply for funding and they receive it. And so then once I figured out those amounts, I figured out how many like how big of a female population between 15 and 49. And so then I found like the per capita amounts by dividing the total by the amount of women. Sorry. Yeah, by the amount of women. Sorry, can you repeat the second question?
Yeah, that was a good explanation of the first. No, it was just what do you think actually was going on? Like states were spending these monies in many different ways to the extent that we saw better outcomes with more, if I'm understanding right, with more and more expenditures resulted in slightly better outcomes. Why? How?
I think part of it is just being able to maintain these facilities. And so because they're state funded facilities, more women are able to go to these facilities to get screenings for like mammograms and for pap smears to make sure that they don't have these cancers. And if they do, they're able to get treatment from these state and federally funded centers. And then also in a state like California, which has such a great hand in like research with like the UCs and everything, they're able to do more research in order to help like mitigate and to help treat these cancers.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Brianna, for a great presentation again, and thank you, Dr. Kravitz, for the question. And so our next student that will be presenting today is Luke Citron, who interned with Civic Well this term.
All right, can you all hear me?
We can hear you, yep.
Great. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Luke Citron from the University of California, Davis. Today, there are 94 subbasins in California, which provide water to 25 million Californians and irrigate 6.7 million acres of farmland. These subbasins are in danger of becoming critically overdrafted. 21 of these basins already are. In 2015, the DWR identified 127 groundwater basins as being high or medium priority and gave them 2 years to form groundwater sustainability agencies, the first step in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. In 2019, this prioritization process was repeated and a new total of 94 subbasins were identified as high or medium priority. Any new basin had until 2021 to form a GSA. To explain why some GSAs formed faster than others, I hypothesized that GSAs with large urban populations would form faster, and GSAs that relied heavily on agriculture would form slower. This is because city dwellers would be less invested in water policy and engage less with the policy process, while farmers are highly invested, which would take more time for a coalition and consensus to form. I gathered my data from the 2022 Sigma Basin Table, which provided me with the 94 subbasins identified as high and medium priority in 2019. I used population per square mile to represent urbanization, and I used acres of irrigated land per square mile to represent the importance of agriculture. Both of these sources came directly from the Department of Water Resources as they gathered this for their prioritization results. Ultimately, I failed to find any relationship to support my hypothesis. As you can clearly see in figures 3 and 4, there is no relationship. Interestingly, a large large number of GSAs were formed after the 2017 deadline, as seen in Figure 2, suggesting that there is little enforcement of GSA formation. Going forward, I would suggest that state policymakers continue to study this process, since so little has been done understanding how GSAs and Sigma will go forward in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lou, for a great presentation today. And so if there is a question from the internship host side, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, I can go ahead and unmute you. All right, and if not, over to the academic team. And Luke, you may want to go ahead and have Professor Butters, you may want to go ahead and have your presentation up. Perfect. Oh, Professor Butters, you are muted. I can.
Wow, look at that. I've been doing this for so long. Anyway, thank you. But great job, Luke. That's what I was saying. You did a wonderful job. I have questions, but the main question I have is you mentioned enforcement there at the very end, and I love some good enforcement. So what is it what does enforcement look like right now? You said it's kind of lacking, right? So what does that actually look like? And then what does it look like for you? If we wanted to enforce this better in the future, what should we be doing? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question, sir. And it's, from what I've been able to gather, it's really nothing right now. What has happened is that there has been basin remapping. So basically they would redesign the borders. And there were a few court cases, and then I think another few laws passed around 2018, 2019 to kind of solidify that process. But when it came to GSA formation, there really wasn't anything going on there. What I would like to see happen for this is it's because Sigma and the GSA process is very rooted in the Californian belief in, local governance and local administration with state oversight only to correct mistakes. I think there's a lot of strength in that. However, what I would want to see is either more of a greater regional approach by having several GSAs gather into like regional bodies, or even having something like, I don't know, a state, I don't want to say Congress, right? But some sort of clearinghouse so GSA agencies would be able to meet together and communicate clearly. And this would allow the Department of Water Resources to be able to help intervene with different GSAs much quicker.
Excellent. Thank you. Nice job.
Great. Thank you so much, Lou, for a great presentation. And thank you, Professor Butters, for that question. And so our next student that will be presenting today is Ruby Arceo, who interned with Cal EPA.
Is the screen showing?
Yeah, it looks great, Ruby.
Okay, so hi, my name is Ruby, and I'll be doing my project presentation on wastewater issues at the California-Mexico border region. More than 143 million gallons of raw sewage have been discharged into the Tijuana River upstream in Tijuana earlier this year in February. It's very important that the ecosystem and communities living at the border region are protected from harmful substances continuing to flow into the Tijuana River and the New River at the California-Mexico border. My research problem is focusing on the impact that funding in California has on projects in building infrastructure and repairing for water quality issues, as well as looking at the Mexico border region projects as well. And my research question asks, what impact does waste infrastructure projects at the Tijuana River and New River have and the California-Mexico border region based off of funding and resources available? My hypothesis is that California will have more successful water quality projects at the border region compared to Mexico when it comes to management, efficiency, and the amount of repairs needed over time for the wastewater projects. My data and measures was me choosing 6 projects from the US and Mexico border region, 3 from the US and 3 from Mexico, and looking at repairs from the time period between 2000 to 2022. And through a case study method and I was analyzing the funds for project implementation and repairs over time, comparing and contrasting the projects through initial funding and continued funding for repairing infrastructure, mainly issues like old pipes breaking down, which has caused sewage to run into these rivers. And my findings are pointing to California's wastewater projects being more efficient overall compared to Mexico when it comes to funding and maintenance, and border projects for the wastewater issues rely on the US side of the border to continue to get funding and resources and materials to continue using these projects over time as they continue to break down and halt in usage. And there are upcoming plans to put more focus on wastewater issues at the California-Mexico border, as these two governments are continuing to communicate on this important environmental issue. Some implications and policy suggestions are that there should be less need for funding, materials, and maintenance for infrastructure at the border region rivers if the projects have an appropriate amount of funding to sustain these projects over time. Additional funding should be set aside for wastewater issues at both sides of the border, with California continuing to support projects on Mexico's side of the border, as Mexico's government is facing lack of funding, resources, and capacity more when compared to California's government. And communication at the border should involve communities in the discussion for policy implementation, as well as the repairs and future wastewater projects implemented. And additional groups focusing specifically on wastewater repairs should be created to decrease the number of breakdowns, as taking longer amounts of time to be fixed, to reduce the amount of sewage flowing from the rivers at the California-Mexico border. And that's it for my project. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ruby, for a great presentation today. And then if there's a question from the internship host side, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, I can go ahead and unmute you on our end. All right. And then if not, over to the academic team. All right, Professor Butters.
Okay, I muted myself this time. So I have a question. Great presentation. Nice job there. I have a question about figure 2. So we see there that the New River is costing more to repair infrastructure there than Tijuana River. So what's the relative size of the New River to Tijuana River? And then also, why is California spending so much more on fixing things at the New River relative to the Tijuana River? Thanks.
So I'm not too sure on the size of the New River and Tijuana River. I forgot how large it was, but I'm pretty sure the New River is larger compared to the Tijuana River. And sorry, what was the second question for California funding?
Yeah. Why does it cost more for the New River than Tijuana? I imagine it has something to do with size, but I was just curious about that.
I think it was most likely due to the size of the wastewater projects that were there. Some of the wastewater projects are a bit larger than others, like there's the Las Arenitas project. I think that might not be for the New River, sorry, I forget about these things. But I think it could be due to that, especially the kind of repair that's needed. Most of them are for pipes breaking down, but that could have been due to another issue as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ruby, for a great presentation. And thank you, Professor Butters, for that question. And so our next student that will be presenting is Alyssa Perez, who interned with the California Council on Science and Technology this term.
Apologies, 1 second. All right, can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah, looks great.
Great. Good morning. Thank you for being here today. My name is Alyssa Perez and my home campus is UC Davis. Lack of participation in public health programs is a problem, whether due to hesitancy, barriers to access, or poor outreach. Figure 1 shows that with greater vaccine uptake, California could have averted over 20,000 deaths during the COVID-19 pandemic. Community resilience is the ability of a community to prepare for, withstand, and rebuild after disasters like extreme weather events or public health emergencies. I predicted that communities with a lower risk to resiliency and therefore a higher projected resiliency would have higher rates of COVID-19 vaccination. Figure 2 illustrates this mechanism. To test my hypothesis, I compared community resilience to COVID-19 vaccination rates at the county level for all 58 California counties, controlling for poverty, percentage of residents over the age of 65, and political affiliation. To control for political affiliation, I used the percentage of a county that voted for Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential election. I did find support for my hypothesis. Figure 3 shows resilience risk is negatively correlated with vaccination rates with a correlation coefficient of negative 0.57. While this was significant, being over the age of 65 and voting for Trump had greater correlation to a county's rate of unvaccinated individuals. Voting for Trump was negatively associated with receiving a COVID-19 vaccine with a correlation coefficient of negative 0.63. Figure 4 shows this relationship. Future research should focus on the relationship between community resilience and partisanship. Efforts should also be made to study resilience at the community level, as cities and communities within counties are highly variable. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Alyssa, for a great presentation today. And we have a question from Ryan Bixman, and I went ahead and just allowed you to talk, but you may have to mute yourself still. Oh, perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Excellent. Great work, Alyssa. Thank you for the presentation. So I was looking at, I think especially the figure in the top right corner there, the bar graph, and you talked about vaccination rates and like voter preference, and those can be or have been correlated with like urban and rural populations in other ways. I wonder if you considered that in your counties you have there. You have some pretty urban, highly dense populations in some counties and other less dense populations in others. I wonder if you considered that as any sort of confounding effect or factor in community resilience.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Ryan. I didn't consider how urban or how rural a county was. I do think that is a really good research question for future research, especially how being like of a small rural county can affect voter preference, or being of a county that's considered less resilient. I did find that counties that were considered less resilient were more likely to vote for, or had been more likely to vote for Donald Trump in the 2020 election. So I think that's a really interesting future question.
Great, thank you so much, Alyssa, for a great presentation, and thank you, Ryan, for that question. And so our next student that will be presenting today is Rita Sheikh, who interned with the California Energy Commission Communications Office.
Awesome. And can you see it?
Yes, looks great.
All right. So hi, my name is Rita Sheikh. In the 2020 election, 70% of Californians voted, which was the highest turnout since 1952. However, about 5 million registered voters did not participate. This brings up the question of what increases voter turnout. I hypothesize that the more voting stations in a county, the higher the voter turnout will be. My second hypothesis is the more competitive an election is, the higher the voter turnout will be for California. I looked at all 58 counties and found how many voting stations there were for the 2020 general election, either through their website or by contacting them. For my second hypothesis, I looked at the competitiveness for the 2016 election and the voter turnout for the 2020 election. And I also looked at the competitiveness for the 2012 election and the voter turnout for the 2016 election. I looked at the previous year's competitiveness because by looking at the same year for competition and voter turnout, it determines how voter turnout affects competition instead of the other way around, as how many people vote determines how competitive it'll be. The competitiveness for an election was found by looking at the percent point difference between the two candidates. I compared California to Texas, New York, and Florida, as they all have similar GDPs. After running a correlation analysis, I found there was no correlation between voting stations and voter turnout. Therefore, my hypothesis was not supported. The passage of the Voters' Choice Act and AB 37, in which every registered voter receives a mail-in ballot, could explain why polling stations do not increase turnout. Data from the competitiveness of an election showed no relationship between voter turnout and competition of a general presidential election in California. There was an increase with voter turnout when competition increased in New York and Florida, but the increase was not significant enough to draw any conclusions. The findings could be explained by the fact that California was experiencing different political climates in 2012 and 2016. In 2012, California was recovering from a recession and Obamacare was being implemented, which could increase taxes and affect how Californians wanted to vote. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Rita. And so if there's a question from the internship host side, if you'd like to go ahead and raise your hand, I can go ahead and unmute you. And then if not, over to our academic team, if you can raise your hand. Great, Professor Quila.
Hi, Rita. Thank you so much for a very nice presentation. I was just wondering, you didn't find much relationship for polling stations. I was just wondering if you think there might be other factors that might be affecting voter turnout in these counties or in these states that you think you would account for in a future research project.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think other factors I would account for is race and ethnicity in the counties. I think that plays a big part. In past research, that has been shown that a lot of people of color don't vote, and it's mostly white people that vote. So I'd look into that and see how that also plays into each county's role and their demographics, along with education and income as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rita, for a great presentation today. And thank you, Professor Kalila, for that question. And so our next student today is Angela Abuda, who interned with Environment California.
Hello, I'm Angela Budda, and I'll be analyzing the role of tax credits on residential solar growth. According to the Solar Energy Industries Association, through 2021, the US has installed 130 gigawatts of solar electric capacity, which is enough to power 23 million American households and offset 146 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. How the California Public Utilities Commission incentivizes homeowners to harness this solar energy is through Net Energy Metering 2.0, which allows customers to receive a bill credit for excess generation. The issue is that the CPUC proposed to decrease the credit for solar owners with the proposal NEM 3.0. I will examine whether NEM policies work in California, Nevada, and Washington, and how does a NEM policy revision affect pollution in those states. I hypothesize that a low-earning NEM policy will decrease solar sales, and two, a decrease in solar sales will worsen air quality. I determined the correlation through a comparative case study of these three states, and my independent variable is the NEM policies of these three states, examined using the state's legislative or public utility website. The dependent variable is the solar sales and air quality, and they're found through the U.S. Energy Information Administration, Environmental Protection Agency, and Census Bureau. My findings suggest that the years with the change of NEM policy, figure 1, and the three states has a positive relationship with the amount of solar customers per year, figure 2. And the number of solar residents to air quality had a positive relationship in Washington and Nevada, figure 2 and 3. This implies that if California enacts a policy similar to Nevada's in 2016, we can expect similar results in both solar sales and air quality, and the CPUC should keep the solar tax incentive of a high earning NEM policy and also keep the retail rate of solar tax credits. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, for that great presentation. And if there was a question, perfect. So Laura Dehan, I went ahead and unmuted you. There we go.
Thank you, Cindy. Hi, Angela. Great
Hi.
presentation. Super interesting. I was just wondering, what do you think are some other factors that might have influenced the air quality, that might be outside of just the net metering policy?
Well, my limitations would include like wildfires and like other polluting factors like transportation. So definitely if I did this research again, I would factor in those other polluting factors, because according to figure 4, there's if you could see on the left side, it's more of the Washington data, and it shows that Washington did have the best air quality, but the lowest residential solar. So there is definitely a discrepancy with that.
Right. They also have less people probably than California.
Yeah.
Per place. Okay, cool. Thank you. Super interesting.
Great,
Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Angela, for a great presentation, and thank you, Laura, for the question. And so our next student that will be presenting today is Rachel Lucine, who interned with Environment California.
All right, can you guys see everything?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. Hello, my name is Rachel Lucine, and I did my research on the effectiveness of, okay. Hi, my name is Rachel Lucine. I did my research on the effectiveness of marine protected areas. Over 3 billion people depend on the ocean's biodiversity for their livelihoods. Yet research has shown there's been a 49% decline in marine population since 1970. However, there is hope to save the wildlife within our marine ecosystems through the implementation of marine protected areas, also known as MPAs. MPAs ban various levels of human exploitation, so marine species have sanctuaries to hide from pollution and fishing practices. I hypothesize that the MPAs will see a greater number of fish, as well as an increase in the sizes of said fish, as in the comparison to the reference area used for each MPA looked at. I'm looking at whether an increase in biodiversity of fish species within the 4 MPAs compared to their nearby reference area indicates that the MPAs are effective in preserving California's marine species. As seen in figure 3 here, 3 out of 4 of the surveyed MPAs in their compared reference area saw a much greater number of fish throughout the 2-year surveying period. Along with that, 3 out of 4 of the MPAs in their compared reference area saw greater sizes in the fish that were captured, as seen in figure 4. This indicates that MPAs are an effective way of preserving fish species. With the expansion of more MPAs, or more specifically, state marine reserves, which are the most protected type of MPA, we can provide safer habitat for our marine species. Governor Newsom's pledge to preserve 30% of California's lands and coasts is the perfect reason to implement more MPAs. We are looking for more ways to designate protected habitat to preserve the endangered species found in California, and MPAs are an extremely effective way to provide protective measures that prevent the pollution and overfishing of our oceans. By expanding the size of pre-existing MPAs and implementing regional management plans dedicated to the preservation of the specific species that reside in each MPA, California legislators can greatly increase the efficiency of MPAs. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel, for that great presentation. And then Laura Jehan.
Thank you again, Cindy. Thank you so much, Rachel. I love this research, this question that you've been digging into, and I'm super interested in the results. And I was just curious how you selected the MPAs to look at, because obviously we've got 124 MPAs, I think, off the coast. And did you cherry pick at all where you looked, or was it random, or how did you make that decision?
Honestly, it was mainly what data was available to me because I wanted to look at the biodiversity of fish species, specifically count and, the length and like other indicators of fish biodiversity and health. I was kind of looking through all the different data portals and access available. And I also wanted to do like a comparison of different MPAs. Specifically, I know I was looking for more of like MPAs and reference areas, because I know that's something it's like hard to compare whether MPAs have more effective or are more effective because we don't have a lot of data from before when MPAs were created. So when I was first doing my research, I was looking for data from the prior implementation of MPAs and after, and I found that there wasn't really any data before MPAs were created. So then I decided to transfer into reference areas, and that's what kind of led me to this data, because they did a whole extensive study on these 4 MPAs and reference areas. So definitely in that sense, when I was first doing it, I really was looking for MPAs across each 4 sections of California coast. So northern, central, southern, and like north central. But this was kind of the data I had.
What you could get more
Yeah.
data. Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. Definitely please send me this, because we should use this in our advocacy.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel, for a great presentation. And thank you, Laura, again for the question. And so now we are in our open Q&A portion here. We do have about 9 minutes left of the session. And so both on the internship host side, as well as the academic team side, if folks had questions for our students that presented, if you can go ahead and raise your hand, I can go ahead and call on you. All right, Professor Butters.